Okay, at this point we've discussed a lot about congruency and we've talked about similar triangles, and then now what we're supposed to be doing is discussing congruent triangles. And the reality here is that I think these lessons, if you've been following along, at this point this should be a simpler lesson for you because we've talked about what it means to be congruent already. So let's go through this here. Let's see. So you want to plot the triangle, you want to classify it. Now remember when we talk about classifying, this goes back to something you did back in your junior high or even maybe late elementary age when you learned about the difference between triangles. We classify them two ways. First, based on angle measures. So they're either acute, right, or obtuse. And then the second way is by their side lengths. So they're either equilateral, isosceles, or scalene. So you need to have, when you classify things, make sure you explain your reasoning. Are the sides equal? The lengths of the sides equal? Are the angle measures equal? Do you have a right angle in there somewhere? I mean, those are the things you have to answer in order to classify. Calculating the length of side AB, you're going to use the distance formula like that. It says I could use the Pythagorean theorem to calculate the length. Well, that's a little clue this little girl's giving you here that probably it would have to be a right triangle because you can't use the Pythagorean theorem on any triangle. You're going to need to use the right triangle. So anyway, you're going to translate it to the left, you're going to graph it, then you're going to go ahead and start making your predictions about what are the lengths going to be, then you're going to go ahead and measure them, and you're going to make the lengths, and then what are you going to decide about those same sides, the corresponding sides of congruent triangles? And you're going to use protractors to measure the angles of these two triangles, ABC and DEF. And the big thing is, you make a prediction, then you measure it, and then you're going to say, think about what do you conclude about corresponding angles of congruent triangles. So corresponding angles and sides, are they always going to be congruent? That's basically what you're trying to make as an observation. So what you want to notice is that in a triangle, pair of triangles like this, if they are congruent, then which are the angles that are equal? And this is kind of important, here, that you remember that not just, not any angle like angle W here, which is clearly acute, is not necessarily going to be congruent to angle K, which is clearly obtuse. It does correspond, but it corresponds to another angle. Now, in my experience, some kids are not always clear on that word corresponds, or it kind of maybe isn't their favorite word. I think of it like matching, right? I mean, like when you play the old card game where you pick a card and you got a 7, and now you pick another card and it has to match another 7, right? So that's the idea here. One of these angles matches one of the angles down here. And the same is true for each angle. They match. Only in math and in the books, and what we call it corresponds. Okay, we don't use that word match. We use corresponds. So anyway, you're going to notice, do we have matching or corresponding sides and angles? And you're going to answer questions about that. And then in essence, you should be able to answer some questions about how can you create a different triangle that is congruent, and what are the properties of congruent triangles. And that's really all there is to this one. It's pretty simple.